about the two of you. And I hope I'm not being crashed. Junior, we'll start with you.
That's fine.
Tell me a little bit about your background. You were telling me just about your studies as well.
Right.
But tell me about you.
So my undergrad, I have a double major. Started at Florida State, graduated from JU locally, but a double major in opera and sacred music because I had a desire to actually be a minister of music and sing opera, not preach, not pastor. So I have an extensive background in sacred music and understanding the history of it in church music, and then opera as well.
Okay, and then senior, this is the oldest Baptist church in Florida. Tell me just about the church a little bit, and you know, for people who pass by and they see the big steeple, but they don't really know about the church. Tell me a little bit about it, some of the things that stick in your mind.
Well, what really sticks is, first off, we're the oldest Baptist church, existing Baptist church in the state of Florida. Some may have started before, but they're not existing now. We're the oldest existing one. And I think what stands out with me more than anything else is the fact that during a period that it was impossible for a colored, in 1838, Bethel was founded. And then they had about 3 or 4 slaves. But then the membership grew, and the colored all but outnumbered the whites. And they went to cohort because they had to be separate. And they went to cohort, fighting the separatism, and won the case. That's what stands out. During that period that the blacks won, the name of the church, Bethel. Well, First Baptist downtown claims the same history. But we're talking about Bethel. And when the whites left Bethel, they became Tabernacle.
Right.
And then in the subsequent, later they changed to First Baptist. So that's their history.
Are they the ones who bought the church from Bethel, and then Bethel built its own? Is that how
Bethel was awarded the church, the building, everything. And so the whites moved out and became Tabernacle, and then they became First Baptist. When I was here about 3 years, I got a call from old man Lindsay, the pastor of First Baptist. And he called me up and said, "Brother McKissick, let's go back to Bethel." And meaning we would join in worship, celebration of the 125th,
I think it was.
the 125th anniversary. And for the first time, I'm pretty positive I was the first black to ever preach there. And he came and preached there in the other building. And we did that for every 5 years,
Right.
until Vines and Lindsay.
Until they retired, actually.
Yes, until they retired, yes. So that stands out with me, that I pastored for 48 years that kind of a church where I grew up in. So I like him. Well, I said like you. I've never been a member of any other church.
Me either. I just pastored
Okay.
You grew up in the church that you...
I grew up in Bethel from a child, from a baby.
So let me ask you then, because we're focusing on the music in the black church, do you feel that over the years, from the time that you were growing up in the church to now, that music has changed at all?
Oh, yes.
How did it start, and how has it changed? And pretend as though you're talking to someone who has absolutely no clue, because there's a lot of people who don't understand
Right.
the lingo, they don't understand the terminology. So tell us how it felt, what it was about in the beginning, and I'll ask you the same thing.
Okay.
Well, I came up in the period when we were commonly called colored. So for the colored community, this was the silk stocking church with anthems, hymns, classical spirituals. No loud worship, no instruments other than an organ. And if you were in that other building, you'd see an old tracker style organ, but it's now electrified, and an organ. This was the lead colored church with that, a pipe organ, and I came up under that kind of style, and that's what the city, the colored community said, that's the silk stocking church. Meaning that the whosoever, the who's who attended. Now, our family were no affluent family, by no means, but we were influential. So we were here along with others. I didn't see that kind of culture of the silk stocking. I just saw people. And I thought if I worshiped anywhere else, they were wrong, but we were right.
It's interesting to hear you describe the music when you were a child in the beginnings as being more subdued, quieter, a different tone. And I'm going to ask Bishop McKissick Jr., what did that represent then, and how did it morph into what we know it as today?
Interesting. I think for the black church, what I discovered, because his story is my story, in its initial stage, because growing up in Bethel, well, that's all I knew. Anthems, classical music. The prelude would be a Bach toccata and fugue. That would be the prelude. That's all I knew. Well, when I left and went north, I discovered what's called Dr. Watts. It's a call and response where deacons would do devotion. And like my dad, I said to myself, "This is some unlearned people. What in the world is this music they're doing?" But what I discovered was many blacks from the South migrated north. And even in the South, there were differing styles of black music in differing churches. So you would have, Bethel was along the lines of the AME church, music-wise, kind of what we call high church. But in many of your black churches, you had call and response, what is called Dr. Watts in the black church, where the deacon would sing a line and then you'd repeat it. Well, we did a little of that. Guide me, O thou great Jehovah.
But that was after it was when Wilson.
That was, but we had come to do a little of it, but not a lot. Yeah. So I got up north and discovered this different style of music, where there was this call and response, where there was this more soulical, rhythmic kind of music, not more spiritual, not less spiritual, not more meaningful, not less meaningful, just different. Yeah. I think it morphed in Bethel as people morphed into Bethel that weren't birthed in Bethel, but that came from other religious experiences. And as people came from other religious experiences, and as Dad, even before, when I was a kid, as Dad began to hire different types of musicians who came with different experiences, there came this evolution of the music. But what's important, Joy, is that while the music evolved in Bethel, we never left and still have not left what had become the signal style of Bethel, the hymns, as you see a pipe organ in the new building, because there were certain things that were meaningful to Bethel as a black church that we wanted to keep. So this evolution was not exclusive to the new music, but inclusive of all that had become music in Bethel.
So give me an idea of those three, I don't want to say styles because they're all a piece of each other, but so in the beginning, some songs that come to mind that represent that, more classical, as you describe it.
Let Mount Zion Rejoice, Inflammatus.
Yes.
Lift Up Your Heads, O Ye Gates.
Lift up your heads, O ye gates, yeah.
Those are all anthems that I grew up on. That was the kind. What are some others?
Oh, well, I would call one you would hardly, Brother James Eyre.
Yeah, I don't know that.
I know.
But as you learned about this new music when you went up north and just heard different experiences being, you know, shown through music, was it more, was it less, was it more, I don't know, was it a more upbeat? Was it more?
It was more upbeat. It did not have, if I could use genres, it didn't have the classical feel to it. You know, anthems are in the classical genre, if you will. The Lift Up Your Heads, O Ye Gates, the Let Mount Zion Rejoice. That's more of your classical style. This was more, you know, in the black church, they termed our early music sorrow songs, because they were built off of what was called the African rain shout. The African rain shout was a music that slaves brought over and was first in West Indies and in America, particularly in the Carolinas, where the enslaved people would get in a circle and it would be this fusion of music, shout, and rhythm. And it would be a reinterpretation of music that they heard from the white preacher, who used music and the Bible to keep them in line. But then they would go out, get in this circle and sing things like, over my head I hear music in the air. There must be a God somewhere. And before I'll be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. Everybody talking about heaven not going there is another one. Well, that was a signal to the white preacher that you're going to hell because of the way you treat us. And so when I got up north, that's the kind of music I heard, this kind of soul music that they called sorrow songs, but they were really songs validating that God's going to bring you through. God's going to bring you out. And so the high church black music was more about God. Lift up your heads, O ye gates, let Mount Zion rejoice. The more sorrow songs were about God bringing us out. It was more practical, more God delivering us, more us affirming that this situation we're in, slavery, is not going to be the end of us. Well, when slavery was over, those songs kept the meaning, but then just became about life, the struggle that we're in, being black, or whatever the situation might be, that this God is going to bring us out. Lord, I thank you, thank you, thank you all the days of my life, that kind of thing. And so, you know, I get up there and I hear this foot stomping, foot patting music, and it's like, oh, okay. And it's not that we didn't do it here. There were times we did it.
Right. That's what I wanted to point out. I'm glad you said that, because it was here also. But it's like him coming up, he wouldn't dare be visiting the other churches. And I did have an opportunity in my coming up to visit other churches. That's why I would say, when I would visit other churches with a different style of music, I would think they were wrong, we were right. But I always had a liking for it, so that when I got older, I would slip around and visit some of the churches, because some of them it was rhythmic, it touched your emotional aspect of, worship. And I always wanted that in Bethel, without losing the other. And I started that I really started that because we never had, the only instrument we had was the pipe organ. And I started by bringing in a piano that helps with the rhythm and helps with the beats and whatever. So it was here, but he never had that exposure here. Right. But once he got away. And when he came, by the time he finished seminary and began pastoring and went to Ohio, he had another style that he brought back here.
Right, right. And I think you know, as an African American, as my dad just said, he would go to these other churches and like it because it's innate in us.
Right.
As black people, because every form of music can be historically traced to the African rain shout in Africa. The African rain shout produced the spirituals. The spirituals produced the gospels. The gospels produced jazz. Jazz produced R&B. R&B produced hip hop. So there would be no Beyonce. There would be no Drake if there were not an Albertina Walker. There would be no Travis Scott if there were no Earth, Wind, and Fire. But there would be no Earth, Wind, and Fire if there were no Mahalia. And you can trace that all the way back to Africa, so that this kind of soulical, this soul that we feel when we hear music. And now all of that is incorporated in the black church music experience. The jazz, it's incorporated in. They even incorporate the jazz in the hymns now, in the improvisation of how they play the hymns. In the music you hear now, you hear these jazz chords, or there will be the underlying instrumentation of R&B in the gospel songs that you sing. That's the uniqueness, I think, of the black church music experience, that every genre can be felt in the musical experience of the black church, because it all traces to Africa.
I'd like to inject this, because he is so correct about that. I had gone to Jerusalem, the Holy Land, twice, and particularly during the day, in the time that I went, they would say, if you ever go to the Holy Land, you will never be the same when you come back. And I went twice, and I was the same when I came back. And I'm saying that because I went to South Africa on a group of pastors. And it was white pastors and black pastors. I was going to preach to one of the native churches. The whites were going to one of the white congregations. So we went on a bus, and they let them off, and then carried us where I was going to preach, like in the village. And when we drove up, I heard the music, the chants. And I never will forget that the moment I put my foot or my feet on the soil, I identified myself by saying, this is where I am from, and felt the strength that one ought to feel in who they are. And I went into that place. I wanted to get on the floor with them. Their music was just, oh, wow. It was awesome. And when I came back, I was different. So it was the music.
And that was in South Africa.
South Africa.
And let me ask you this, because we're going to go a little bit away from the history and just take a look at the ways people may see this now. Two things I want to ask you. First, some people may see music, just maybe in any church, as being like the pregame show. You know?
Sure.
Why is music so important? I wouldn't even say it's more important in the black church, but why is music so important in the church?
One, because it's biblical. That's first and foremost.
First and foremost.
When you read the Bible, you discover, particularly in the Psalms, where they admonish you, oh, clap your hands, all you people. Sing unto the Lord a new song. Their word, not to get too theological, in the Psalms are described as certain ones. There are certain Psalms called the Psalms of Ascent, because they would sing these psalms as they marched up the hill to the temple or the tabernacle, which was at the top of the mountain. So music has been a part of the biblical faith experience. It is something that is rooted in your relationship to God, so that music is not a tack on or tag along or the pregame show. And you're right, as many people treat it. I could go into so many reasons for why they treat it that way, from music that is not as sacred as it should be to music that is not as theologically sound as it should be. But when we really understand the nature of music and how music comes from the soul and how music is simply preaching to instrumentation, because you're singing about God, you're talking about God. These are lyrics to God. It becomes an opportunity. Preaching is just an opportunity for you to listen and say amen. Music is an opportunity for you to talk to God or about God as the preacher does. And I think that's why it's important.
church, my music is nothing like your music. Your music is better. Do you feel that music in the black church is better?
Well, I'm going to let him answer that.
I would say it's different. And it is suited for us because of it's always been a message. As we go back in slavery, it was a message. And we still see it as a message. But in the contemporary, it's also rhythmic. You can't hear it if you really want to free yourself without. Now, I'm 93, and in the contemporary movement that came here from him, rather than my fighting it, I fell in with it. Because it gave me a sense of who I am, who we are. So that doesn't make it look so strange when we see them in the Congo in doing that which they feel. So music ought to make you feel. This is like jazz, ought to make you feel like moving.
But you know what's interesting is now you hear, for lack of a better term, a lot of white church music in the black church. We call it, let me be not politically correct, just proper, CCM music, which is your Hillsong, your Planet Shakers. Now, any of my white brothers and sisters that watch this, they're going to say, oh, I know that music. But we do that music now, which becomes an interesting dynamic that in the black church we now do that. However, there is nothing like having done that music to watch my congregation when we turn the corner and get back to our roots. There's a different kind of energy and a different kind of movement. Not that they don't enjoy the other, and not that they don't worship and lift their hands, but when we turn the corner and go to what is our music, I wouldn't say it's better, but I say it's better for us because our music is birthed out of our experience. So it's not just a matter of faith, it's a matter of experience. And so as we sing our songs, we are thinking about our experiences being black in America. And it gives the music a different energy, a different passion, and a different conviction. So not better, better for us, and different, but never deficient.